Hello guys, it's been a little while since I made my last video about how, I guess, the easiest way to get to endgame, so I figured that it would be time to make a video about what to do once you've hit the endgame. Is it important? You know, what should I focus on? What is the actual endgame? What am I going to be doing? All these questions and more will be answered. Let's get into it. So the first thing that you'll probably notice is sigils. If you're not familiar with it, some of them are really nice. They'll give you crit chance, they'll give you auto revive, they'll give you guts. However, the thing that's really important when it comes to this stuff now, once you hit the end game, a lot of the old sigils that you've had, you know, the 2, 3s, the 4s, even the 4+s kind of all get tossed aside as you make way for the 5th tier, so like the V tier of sigils. That includes damage cap, stamina, fight or flight, and all these different, you know, interesting or unique passive holding sigils. And before we actually get into the different kinds of sigils and which ones I guess the ones that you kind of want to invest in, let's just talk a little bit about the advantages of having 4 versus 3 versus 2 versus 1, etc., and what the plus in anything even means. So if you aren't already familiar, again, with the sigils, you see here, depending on what level the sigil is, whether that's a 4 or a 3, your sigil will start at a certain level and can only max out at a certain level. So in this case, you'll see I have a Steel Nerves 4+, which the plus means that you have access to a second skill that's available on it, and it starts at level 7. Steel Nerves and Guts in this case starts at level 7 because it's level 4. But if you take a look at a 5 or like a 5th tier, you see that it starts at 11 out of 15. Now, these are obviously going to be your bread and butter. Number one, because you have more levels, and if you take a look at the tiering or like what some of these things will do, if you max out a damage cap that's at rank 5, you gain 15 levels or a potential of 15 levels. And if you're just looking at, you know, the trait list and what you can max out on, what you can gain most value from, you'll see that you have a total of 65 levels specifically for damage cap. Damage cap is one of the most important things, and I'll kind of get into that later and why it's so important. But for me, if I want to get the max value and I want to be able to obviously hit level 65, so I get the max, I guess, skill damage cap, my Skyborn or Skybound Arts damage cap, and my left right click damage caps, I'm going to need 4 damage cap sigils and probably a Rithstone that also gives me 5 levels for my damage cap to be maxed at level 65. But in order to do that, again, like I mentioned before, you need to specifically have the 5th tier or 5th+ or 5th tier plus of your specific sigil that you're interested in. Now, I mentioned earlier that you do kind of need some help from your Rithstone, and we'll kind of very quickly jump onto that or describe that, or I guess like kind of show this off. If you try to upgrade your weapon and you go to, let's say, imbue it, you'll see that there's a bunch of right stones. And the thing about the right stone is that they have traits that you can add onto your weapon, and depending on what you're looking for, in this case, I'd be looking for something like damage cap 5. I definitely need something like damage cap 5 here because, again, if I want to hit 65, either I would go a little bit too far and I would have like 10 extra if I wanted to use a 5th damage cap sigil 5. Or I could find, you know, on my right stone, a level 4 accompanying trait. When that's the case, you start to like, you know, you start to min-max, or when you're starting to optimize in the late game, you're not trying to just have random stuff that means nothing or has no value to you. In Lancelot's case, I'm trying to make sure I get stuff like critical hit damage, or I'm trying to get stamina because I want more damage. I'll probably want improved dodge, I want more dodges, or I want some of these new special traits like untouchable, which lets me dodge even further. I'm not too sure how sold I am on flight over fight. You do hit the damage cap relatively quickly, which is why I'm trying this out. But in any case, you're going to try and want to min-max a lot of these because, again, you want to make sure that you can fit all the different traits or the different sigils on your list. Some of these, again, are kind of specific, and kind of hitting the specific max, aka 20, is kind of difficult, so you're going to want to be very careful with how you set these things up. In my case, I wanted to make sure I have max level guts. Guts only comes in the 15 or plus 15 variation, so that alongside damage cap is what I'm going to want to have on my right stone, because I want 5 or at least 4 for my right stone for guts so that I can get 20. And then again, with damage cap, I want 5 or at least 4 so I can hit 65. All of this to say, basically, guys, you have to be very careful and I guess just kind of optimize the way that you play the game, especially with your sigils. Just keep in mind that, again, once you hit the end game, you're probably going to want the higher tier sigil, which makes sense. But just keep in mind that although some of them are nice and you'll, obviously have access to the plus variations later, don't try and upgrade some of the earlier 5 variations, especially if it's something like damage cap, because if it's accessible from the transmission reroll and it isn't something that is only locked behind the curios, it's more likely that you'll be able to get something with a plus. So in other words, nimble onslaught plus, tyranny plus, stamina plus, as opposed to something like getting flight over fight, which I don't even know if it has a plus variation. Who knows though? If you do, you'll probably also want this at some point with a plus variation as well. Now, before we get into the endgame weapon, let's just talk about the normal weapons that you have and what you kind of need to do as you're starting to beat some of the later bosses, and that's obviously upgrade your weapons. You gain attack power, you gain certain traits, or maybe I don't know if you actually gain any traits, but you gain access to the masteries in the late game when you unlock the collection of certain weapons. Now, I don't really have to explain how good gaining extra stat is, but in terms of your weapons, not only do you want to be maxing out your weapon to like level 150, but unlocking a lot of these other weapons will give you stuff like attack power, damage dealt, health, skill damage cap, skybound art damage cap, well, that's for the ultimate weapon, but like stun power, critical hit damage, like all these other ones, right? These are all very obviously helpful and useful because you don't want to get one shot, even though you'll definitely get one shot anyways. But all these free stats are really nice and you're trying to get closer and closer towards the damage cap. So just keep in mind that when you're entering into the late game, these are not something that you can ignore. And just as a clarification, because I've definitely seen people a little bit confused or I guess unsure about this, even though I'm not using these weapons like Damascus Knife, spoiler for those of you that don't want to know about like the endgame weapons, but before I was doing that, I was using the Vigalta. And the thing about the Vigalta is that even though I was only using this and I wanted the crit chance, I believe that you get from the Vigalta, all of these other traits apply, even though I'm not using any of these specific, awakenings online or any of these specific awakenings right now. So with that being said, you definitely want to upgrade every single one of these traits. It gives you a lot of stats, especially health, because they just like throw it all over the place. Stun power, I don't know how stun power really works for Lancelot because it doesn't feel like he does that much damage or that much stunning in general, but it's free stats. Make sure to upgrade it. Okay, so there is a bit of like spoilery here. If you didn't know as well, you definitely are going to be unlocking more fights. And of course, like it's going to go up in difficulty. There's going to be more fights. I don't want to spoil too much of what you fight. When you get into the end game, one of the main things that you're going to be doing is obviously unlocking new fights. Although you're probably gonna have to clear each of these stages at least once for any random thing that you're going to be farming for. In order to unlock the next tier of mission or unlock something new to fight, you are pretty much going to have to fight these like missions that have like little daggers or like specific markers around them. I think they're like red. I don't have the exact image for what they look like because obviously I beat them, but I was originally misled into thinking that you have to beat every single mission in the game in order to get the end game weapon. That is not the case, and if you want to get the the end game weapon, you just have to fight the boss. And I'm not going to talk about it, but you have to fight a boss. I'm not really going to like spoil what it is, but it drops from a boss, and that's all you have to do. You don't have to beat anything else. You don't have to do anything like super crazy. You just have to make sure that you unlock it. You go through the story, you keep completing all like the missions at the top right that shows. That's essentially all that you have to focus on when it comes to the fighting. And of course, these are really nice because endgame fights, you get to test your weapons, you get to test your skills, your builds to see if it's worth it, if it's not worth it. All that to say, basically, there is something to do in the endgame. Even though you're going to be spending a load of time with sigils and weapons, you will find something that you will inevitably be able to, I guess, like test your damage on. And that's a lot more than some other games can say. So I'm happy. You should probably be happy about this too. I'm not going to tell you how to feel though. But side note about the game cycle or the end game cycle, the end game loop, I guess you could call it as well. It is a lot of farming for one piece of gear, farming for a sigil, and helping out your friends or doing your dailies because they give you like little Dahlia badges if you do like the quick quest every single day. That's basically your gameplay loop for the day. You'll help people fight, or you'll be farming for stuff yourself because silver centrums are just subhuman to farm for. You'll find out what that is later if you don't know what that is. But all that basically to say that you're going to be fighting bosses constantly. You can obviously fight like lower level bosses if you just want to like instantly clear out the like the room, which is fine as well. But overall, the end game fight cycle is fighting harder bosses or bosses that drop things that you need for either awakenings or to upgrade your gear. But again, you still have the ability to test like different variations of builds, see if you can clear bosses quick enough. Or again, you can farm for your other characters, which again, it kind of feels almost similar to a game like MapleStory, where you just keep farming for each character that makes your next character stronger, that makes your next character stronger, that makes your next character stronger, something like that. or again for your other builds, and it feels a little bit different than, again, the game that everyone's going to talk about, which is Monster Hunter, because again, you have access to a whole new character that you have to invest in. They'll have their own like pros and cons, and obviously you can have multiple people in your party too. So if you want to have like the perfect 4-star or like the perfect team to help you out, that is also a variation or like a kind of build or a kind of, I guess, like end game that you can play with, where it's like you have the perfect squad that like attack buffs you or revives you or defense buffs you, etc, etc. Okay, now a little bit of a spoiler. I mentioned it a little bit earlier and I apologize, but the endgame weapon for this character is the Damascus Knife. Spoiler right now, if you don't want to know any more about the endgame weapon, feel free to tune out or just skip this section. However, we're going to talk about the endgame weapon, which for my class is the Damascus Knife. Now, the very interesting thing about this weapon is that it is super broken. Maybe not that interesting, but it is very cool because number one, it glows and it gives you a damage cap built in, which is very valuable, and it also gives you sigil booster, which is kind of nice in case if you don't get like a level 5 of a trait, you get a level 4. The regen is kind of whatever, and then there's catastrophe, which is its own nice thing. But long story short, guys, this weapon is really, really strong. You get the endgame weapons from beating the last boss. And again, this is something that a lot of people that are in the early part of endgame kind of need to work towards. Arguably, you could say that even though you've beat the story, that isn't technically the endgame if you consider getting this weapon and finishing out your build the endgame. So like the early mid game or like the early end game or the middle of like the end game involves getting this weapon. And then once you have it, you pretty much hit the end game. That's just like another goal that you kind of have to work around. But this weapon gives you so much stat. Just for comparison, again, like I have the Vigalta over there. But so if we compare the Vigalta real quick, I have like this decent, I guess like decent attack, like decent kind of traits and stuff on this Vigalta. But then you realize very quickly, oh, wait a second. That says 2,497 attack. And the Damascus Knife says 2,300 attack. 6,300 attack. That being said, obviously, one is an endgame weapon and the other is just for like early game and you can get it early on. However, this is like another thing that a lot of people will focus on obtaining and focusing on getting. That being said, though, guys, I will be completely straight with you. I had to farm almost 120 runs to get this weapon. I did get other weapons in the meantime, which, you know, allowed me to play other characters like Io and Id and whatever. But, or maybe not Id. I was trying Io and Zeta, but, you know, I'm a Lancelot main. So it kind of sucked that I didn't get it. And as a PSA for that, if you unlock characters or if you unlock any characters before the last fight, that will contribute to the total pool of weapons that you can get. So just a bit of a PSA or a tip, if you don't want to get someone, you know, someone random's weapon, like or some random character's weapon while you're farming, don't unlock them until after you've gotten the weapon for your character, and then, you know, feel free to do whatever you want. If you're just unlocking the characters for fun, I would kind of advise you not to do that because, again, you kind of lose out. You kind of have to farm with an even smaller pool or with an even bigger pool of weapons to pick from, which is not very nice. And again, I was not very happy when I got 7 like other weapons aside from Lancelot's beforehand. That's the whole endgame weapon grind, though. Okay, now the final thing that we have to kind of talk about, and it's not going to be that easy to describe, is going to be the damage cap. Like if you've basically focused at all or paid attention at all to the Granblue Fantasy, I guess, like Relink community or any discussion around like the end game, you'll know that there is a lot of talk about the damage cap, and you might be concerned or confused about what it is. How important is it? Like, you know, this thing doesn't even give you any damage. Like, how good is it, right? The issue that the game has right now is that damage cap is so easily reachable. Like, if you just throw a bunch of, you know, traits that give you damage, that you kind of are forced into having this damage cap trait. Now, this wasn't present, or as far as I know, this isn't present in other, like, Hunter, like Monster Hunter-esque kind of games, like boss 1v1ing kind of games like this. So if you're new to the concept, basically what this is that once you hit, obviously, your cap for damage, or once you have enough stat, you no longer, no matter what you do, you cannot add any more damage to your attacks. There are a few exceptions to this. If you have supplementary damage, like built into your kit, or if you have the sigil that specifically says add supplementary damage to your attacks, you have the ability to do damage that exceeds the damage cap. If you don't have damage cap, or if you don't have supplementary damage, you're basically going to have to invest all of your time into damage cap. or at least like 4, I believe 4 sigils, I think is the sweet spot. You need 4 sigils, and you also need the right stone on your weapon to also have damage cap, because you want to hit that 65 down there. That's 250% damage cap. Right now, I'm doing about like 24,000 when I swing, like with Lancelot, but if I were to, again, like, you know, get level 65 of my damage cap, I would probably be doing something around like 25,000, which is kind of significant in the long term, you know, of like fighting and doing more damage. And ultimately, it doesn't matter if you have something like stamina or tyranny, you know, that increases your damage if you don't have, you know, the ability to do more damage with your damage cap. Basically, long story short, like, this is, again, another section that if you're not familiar, if it's too nerd for you, feel free to kind of skip out on it. I apologize, but it is really important to note, or it is kind of important to describe what it is, because if you're curious why other people are doing more damage than you, this is probably why. At the end of it all, though, what you're basically trying to do with the damage cap, and the reason why I said this is because one of the end game things that you're trying to look for is basically 4 perfect damage cap traits or sigils that also have like a trait that you want, whether that's flight or, you know, improved dodge, or, you know, some other dodge mechanic, if it's regen, if it's crit rate, stamina, whatever you want to pair alongside the damage cap. That's going to be really important. I guess I kind of messed up because I said a couple, literally some of these I don't even think are obtainable on the sigils. What I was trying to say, though, is that with damage cap, you're probably going to be looking for 4 of these, a damage cap 5+, and you're going to want to find something like auto revive, guts, potion hoarder, whatever you're looking for, nimble onslaught, because a lot of these are either ones that you want to get at least 1, or like dip 1 trait into, or like 1 sigil into, like with potion hoarder, where you want to get it at +15, or you're gonna, you know, want to get something like guts at 20, which means that, again, you're gonna have to get a right stone that has it as well, or you can just accept that at 15 it's a 170-second cooldown. Either way, just in terms of min-maxing, these are the things that I've kind of been looking for. I've been looking for auto revive, I've been looking for guts, I've been looking for potion hoarder, nimble onslaught, and firm stance, and a lot of these you're probably gonna want to find or tie alongside your damage cap, because stamina and tyranny is fine alongside some of the other ones like war elemental or the curio specific sigils, but you are probably going to want to upgrade your damage sigils at the very, very beginning, because that's, again, what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck in terms of damage increase. That is finally everything that you need to know about damage cap. So guys, that's basically everything that you have to do when it comes to the end game of Granblue Fantasy. Of course, there's going to be the fighting, there's the helping your friends. I believe next month or in a month or so, I don't know, don't quote me on this, but I had read somewhere that raids or something like that, or a bigger raid is going to be coming out, which is exciting, very cool. You'll finally have another location to kind of try out your builds and see how good your character or your souped out characters are, so stay tuned for that. In any case though, guys, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something. If you did, make sure to like, comment, turn the notification bell, subscribe. Let me know what other kind of content you want to see, or whatever guides or curious content that you have about Granblue Fantasy. I appreciate all the feedback and the love and support that you guys have been showing these videos. I appreciate it so much. Same for the shorts and all the other content on my channel. Thank you so much though, guys. I will see you all next time. Check out the rest of my socials. If you're curious about anything else Granblue Fantasy related, I'll see you on the next one. Adios.